Well, hello everyone. For those of you who I have not had the privilege to meet, my name is Andre Casson and I am the head of the Australian International School. I hope that you're all having a lovely break with your beautiful children, and we look forward to welcoming you all back to school in just over a week's time. Now, given recent events over the last few weeks, as a school, we have done a complete 360 review of our structures, procedures and practices around our IT infrastructure. And the reason we're doing that is because what we want to do is to make sure that we are keeping everyone in our community safe. Now, an absolutely essential part of that process is our webinar today. It's an opportunity for us and our experts to share with you the absolute best practice in cyber safety and cyber security. The title of our webinar today, Keeping You and Your Children Safe in Cyberspace. Now, for this webinar, we have partnered with Kroll, a world-renowned leader in the area of cyber security and cyber safety. And we have two wonderful speakers who we can see on the screen here now. Louisa Vogel-Enzang, who is the Associate Managing Director from Melbourne, Australia, and Jake Griffiths, Senior Associate, also in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to Louisa and Jake. We are very much looking forward to hearing from you as to how we can keep ourselves and probably most importantly our wonderful children safe. So over to you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and thank you so much for that really warm welcome. And I have to say, it's really great to see organisations take this proactive step to share these insights with the community around staying safe online. So as Andre mentioned, I'm Louisa. I'm joined by Jake. Today, we will be facilitating this session. And I did want to just briefly take you through a bit of an agenda today in terms of what you can expect. We're going to spend a little time talking about the changing digital landscape out there and what that means from a cybercrime perspective. We're then going to take a look at some of the key risks we face as individuals online today, and more importantly, what you can do about them. Then I will hand over to Jake. He's going to talk about protecting your children. Again, looking at some of those key risks and of course, what you can do about them. And last but not least, we're going to leave you with some of the key resources that we recommend you might have a look at following this session if you're keen to learn more. We want to make this interactive today, so we've got a few polls just to prepare you for that. And the first question we'd like to ask you is, how cyber savvy are you feeling today? How confident are you feeling in your online security? And we'll just give you a few moments to answer that one. Okay, lots of responses coming in. Thank you. Okay, we might close that off, Jake, because I think we've got a very strong majority here in that the majority of you are feeling some knowledge, so feeling somewhat savvy, but would like to learn more. So that's fantastic, and we look forward to helping you with that, because what we really want you to get out of today is walking away feeling more confident in your ability to protect yourself online, but also protecting your children. And for those that don't feel savvy at all, there was a small cohort that didn't feel that way, don't worry, we will also give you some really great basics to put into place to help uplift your security. And for those that are feeling very confident, this will hopefully confirm that you're on the right track and doing all the right things. So thanks, Jake. We'll just close off that poll. So I'd like to start, if you will indulge me, in a bit of a personal story. I'm going to have a look at how the digital landscape has changed for me in the last 20 years. Setting aside the fact I work in cybersecurity, I'm a consumer as well. So I've really gone on this journey from, let's say, back in 2001, thinking back to how many online accounts I had back then, and it was really less than 5. And I had literally 2 devices connected to the internet. There was a PC at home that I shared with my parents, and then there was a PC at work. And outside of my work password, I had one password that I was reusing across all of my accounts. And I do count myself as being one of the lucky few back then, because only 7.9% of the world was internet connected. And to the best of my knowledge, I hadn't been involved in any data breaches that I knew about. And that was pretty normal back then, because data breach notification laws hadn't come into play anywhere in the world until a few years later, and they started over in California. Then I reckon it was about a year later that my bank sent me this little token that looked like a mini calculator, and it had 6 digits that would change every minute. And whenever I needed to log into my online bank account, I had to put the username, password, and then this security token number. And I remember thinking, oh, this is, a bit frustrating. This is a bit of extra process and time. But then, because I worked in cybersecurity, I could appreciate that actually there's this trade-off. A bit of extra security with a bit more of my time. That seemed like it was worth it, certainly to protect my bank account. Then I reckon I got my first smartphone, which for history buffs was a BlackBerry, a couple of years later, and I was amazed by the fact I could get email on my phone. So much has changed since then. And then I really remember something very significant happening 10 years later. So I'd moved to Australia from the UK. I was working in a cybersecurity firm, and I fell for my first phishing email, first phishing scam. It was a really busy morning. I was running between meetings, and I quickly was checking my emails. I want to make sure I got back to all the clients quickly. And in the mix of my emails was an email entitled purchase order. And I remember getting really excited because our numbers weren't quite where they needed to be at the end of that month. And I thought, oh, great, a bluebird, as we used to call them. And I excitedly double clicked and opened that email. And I immediately had a sinking feeling, because when I opened the email, it didn't say purchase order, it said invoice. The address of the client was incorrect because it was a client I worked with very often, and the contact details looked off. And I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I've fallen for a phishing scam. Being in security, this is really embarrassing, but also I knew what to do. So I disconnected my laptop from the network, and I called the IT help desk, and they came along and they scanned my laptop for viruses. Thankfully, there were none. And then they rebuilt my machine, and I could reconnect with confidence back to the network. And really what that taught me was scams can happen to anyone. Anyone can fall for what I did, a phishing scam, but there's lots of other types of scams out there, which we'll talk in a bit more detail on later. Other significant events, I discovered my information had been in a data breach in 2016. There's a website actually run by an Australian called Troy Hunt, and it's called Have I Been Pwned? And it's a website where you can go in and just enter an email address or a phone number, and you can find out if that has ever been involved in a data breach. And I remember discovering that an online food delivery service in Australia had lost my information in a breach. And so that was a real light bulb moment for me, because combined with that, I was seeing that I was really struggling to manage and remember all of the complex passwords I'd set myself as a security professional. And I talked to the amazing technical teams around me and said, how can I solve this problem? And so they recommended a password manager, which is something that I have used ever since, allowing me to create those unique passwords for every site. If I'm involved in data breach, I go and change that password for that service, and I can easily remember them. And I also went and enabled some more of the security features on my account. So remember we talked earlier about the bank account little token that's called two-factor authentication. And so I enabled that on as many accounts that it was available at the time, and especially on those kind of high value accounts that I had. Then kind of fast forwarding a few more years, we got notifiable data breach laws come into Australia. So I was, as you would probably expect, notified of a lot more data breaches, this time by the organisation. I signed up to ID theft monitoring following the time I spent at ID Care, that's Australia and New Zealand's national cybersecurity and identity theft support service. And that really compelled me to add that extra layer of monitoring onto my identification. And here we are today. So I've got 130 online accounts compared to 20 years ago when I had less than 5. Myself and my husband have 30 internet connected devices in our home. And you remember I said I had 2 20 years ago. I'm now in the majority of 66% of the world that's internet connected. And I'm aware that my information has been involved in 8 known data breaches to date. And sharing just a bit of a graphical view of all of those internet connected devices I have in blue and all of those online accounts in green, you can really see over 20 years how that has grown. My digital footprint is now huge. And with that brings a growing opportunity for cybercrime. We know, as I mentioned earlier, 66% of the world's population are now internet connected, and there are 46 billion internet connected devices predicted to be connected by the end of 2021. And with the rush to remote work during the pandemic, we also saw this introduced additional opportunity for cyber criminals. This meant quite often that businesses rushed to get people working from home, and some of the security settings didn't always catch up straight away. Cybercrime, unfortunately for us, is a pretty low risk crime for criminals to commit. We're looking at around a 1% conviction rate at this point in time. And attribution on the internet is really challenging, and people can pretend to be in another country, and they can also use tools and techniques to disguise the information that they're sharing. And of course, we overlay that with the complexities of the geopolitical landscape today. And we have a really low risk crime. And it's also fairly low cost for cyber criminals. They have really innovated and acted like businesses over the last 20 years. We're no longer looking at what we previously described as script kiddies acting alone. What we're talking about is more sophisticated enterprises where their services are available as a service via marketplaces on the dark web that are not too dissimilar to the kind of marketplaces we might experience today on the surface web. And they're utilizing a lot of the modern technologies like artificial intelligence to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the scams that they create and the services they create. And sorry, bear with me a second. I'm just going to go briefly back to that slide, because what I did want to mention is really the outcomes of this crime, and what these cyber criminals are looking for is to gain information that has financial value. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of that value on the dark web. The latest research that we've had access to shows that a hacked Facebook account is worth about $65 on the dark web. A hacked Gmail account, $80. A hacked Instagram with 1,000 followers is $5. So there's a real variety in the value. But what that really shows is, if you think about your email, and that one being the kind of highest value on the dark web, that hacked Gmail at $80. When I reflected on what was in my own email a few years ago, I realized that there was a treasure trove of information for cyber criminals in there, because when I moved to Australia, I applied for a rental. I had to share scans of some of my identity documents and share service bills and things like that, and all of these things that I'd left in my email that could have been found if somebody had broken into my email. And so I went ahead and deleted those, of course, but certainly that value can really be explained by what's often traversing our email accounts. So next, I would like to do another poll. Now that you've heard my story and my confessions about falling for phishing scams and reusing passwords, I'd love to hear if you have ever reused a password. We'll just give everyone a few moments to pop in their responses. Okay, I think most people have voted now. If we could share those results, please, Jake. A 100%, yes. And everybody has reused the password, and you're certainly, I hope you can see, not alone in doing that. It is something that cyber criminals are aware of. So when we don't have unique passwords for every site we're visiting, if our information is compromised, our username and password in one way, the cyber criminals will attempt to use those credentials to log into other services. So that's why it's really important to use a unique password. And we're going to look at what that looks like practically a little bit later. So if we could close off that poll. Thank you. So we're going to move on to the section regarding protecting yourself. Before we do that, with the information I shared earlier about the cybercrime landscape in mind, there are some things that I guess we as humans do online that can increase our risk. And I'm specifically focusing this section on our behaviors online. As we know, humans tend to suffer from optimism bias. We think everything is going to be okay. And that's a great trait that we have, but we do need to balance that optimism with a healthy appreciation for risk, and importantly, of course, the tools we can use to help us reduce that risk. And I just want to clarify that there is no such thing as being 100% safe online. There's no technology to date that can make us 100% safe. So we do need to be aware of some of those riskier behaviors and what we can do about them. So we do have that tendency, as I mentioned, we're optimistic and we tend to overtrust people online. We often trust communication, just like I did. I believe that email was absolutely, that was from my customer, no question. And we can overshare information, particularly on social media, that could include, the dates that we're going to be on holiday, the location we're in, and perhaps photos of the inside of our houses. And all of these bits of information leave breadcrumbs for cyber criminals. And what they do with that information is they use it to craft quite specific, perhaps a phishing email scam that is so tailored to you that it feels really realistic, and it's going to increase the likelihood of you clicking. Another area of our more riskier behaviors is that we tend not to have the additional security turned on our online accounts. And as we talked about earlier, this is that two-factor authentication that the banks have been using for many, many years. And it's available on many of our other online accounts, but often we trade off that convenience because that extra layer of security adds a bit more time. And also, just linked to us oversharing on social media sometimes, we often haven't also locked down those privacy settings on our social media. And then the third area of our behaviors that can introduce some risk to our online world is us not monitoring enough our online accounts and our information. As you all know, in Australia, we have our superannuation, and that is something that generally we may just get an annual statement on, but many of us aren't going in and regularly checking the balance and making sure that nothing looks untoward. And low levels of vigilance also looks like ignoring software updates when they come through and not having antivirus software on your devices. So we're going to look at some of those behaviors and then some of the things we can do to reduce our risk in that area. So thinking about when we trust too much as humans, when we're being really optimistic, this is when we can fall for a scam. And scams are not something new. I'm sure you're all familiar with what a scam is. But of course, as our worlds have evolved digitally, the scams have moved online. And in fact, the Singapore Police Force said a record number of scams was reported last year, and pushing the overall crime rate to its highest rate since 2009. Scams can actually come in lots of different forms. Many of you may have had some form of phishing training in your workplace, and that's an email related scam, but quite often they come in via mobile phone from an actual phone call. They can be via messaging apps. They can even be when we're browsing a legitimate website and an advert pops up. And unfortunately, legislation hasn't quite caught up in that sometimes those adverts can be placed there by cyber criminals, and they are actually scams. And the top 3 scams in Singapore at the moment are online purchase scams, internet love scams, and impersonation scams. But we are going to spend a bit of time talking about email phishing scams, specifically really because not only is this the biggest cause of cybersecurity incidents in the business world, but also because it gives us a great opportunity to look at some of the techniques that apply across all of those different types of scams. So phishing can be opportunistic from a cyber criminal's perspective. They will just send out millions of emails and hope that one person is going to get hooked and click on that link or download that attachment to install some bad software. Or they could be spear phishing attacks. These are more targeted, and these relate back to some of the breadcrumb conversations we had earlier about us being maybe oversharing sometimes on social media and leaving those breadcrumbs that criminals can use to really craft a targeted email to us, purporting to be somebody we know or business we do business with based on information they've collected. And we are particularly vulnerable if we are in senior leadership positions in a business, or we are part of the family of a senior leader, or perhaps we're working in accounts payable. We know that 7 in 10 Singaporeans, based on recent research, are aware of what phishing is, and they can spot at least 50% of the phishing emails that are presented to them. But it's always good to practice those skills and develop that muscle memory. So for those of you that are really familiar with phishing, this will be a bit of a recap, but for those that aren't, there's some great guidance on Singapore government website about the 6 signs of phishing. And we're going to take you through a couple of example emails where we can apply those signs just to validate whether these are phishing emails. So this one has all 6 signs of phishing, and the first one being mismatched or misleading information. So we can see that there is an email address this has come from, and that does look a bit sort of unusual, a little bit suspicious, as well as this website here. It's asking us to log on to sgshopping.com. It's an unexpected email, claim your gift card. Just like me, my unexpected purchase order, these emails can often be unexpected. Although that said, there are obviously examples of people who were expecting, and most recently this has happened a lot, a delivery from DHL, or here in Australia, Australia Post. The cyber criminals know we're shopping online a lot. So this can apply, but it may not apply. There's also some urgent language there and threatening language. You know, your account's going to be deactivated within 24 hours. There'll be permanent deactivation. So trying to tap into those emotions and that fear that we're going to lose access to something. There's also a suspicious attachment here. Although I will caveat that with cyber criminals are able sometimes to hide things in what looks like a legitimate attachment. So maybe it's dressed up as a Word document, for example. And there's that promise of a reward, sign 5. If something's too good to be true, it generally is. A bit like my PO. And the last one is the fact that it's asking for some confidential information, address and bank details. Now this one doesn't have all of the signs, so we're just going to go through and see what signs we can see on this one. There's a bit of urgency there, you know, log onto your PayPal account as soon as possible. It uses the word twice, you know, we're concerned someone's using your PayPal account without your knowledge. That would get my adrenaline pumping if I received that one. Then we've got some mismatched, misleading information here. So hovering over the click here, you can see a link that definitely doesn't appear to link in any way to PayPal. And then the other sign we've got is that request for personal information. The one thing I did want to emphasize here is even before we're kind of looking for these physical signs in the email, I always ask myself, do I feel some sort of emotion from this email? Am I excited about the parcel, the purchase order? Does this sound too good to be true? Because that is what the cyber criminals are really looking to tap into, our emotional response that will lead us to clicking on a link or sharing something. Now, if you're still not sure, you can maybe ask a friend or family member to have a look at it with you if they're around. You could also call the institution. If it is an institution you have a legitimate relationship with, you either use the save number that you've got on your phone for them, or you find their legitimate website and call them there and ask them if they sent that to you. And if you do think you've been a victim of a phishing scam, Singapore government advises you that you change your password immediately. And if you use that for other accounts, if you're reusing that password, you do that too. You change those too, and then you will run a full scan with your antivirus software to check for any malicious software that might have come in with that email, and then alert your bank if you've actually given away banking details or credit card details in terms of what you might have filled in by clicking on that link. But really that applies for any scams, regardless of how they come in, over email, over phone. Just taking that moment to think whether you're feeling some sort of emotion about that communication, and buying yourself some time to just think through and verify, is this for real? So now we've had a look at some of the areas where we can be a bit too trusting at times. We're going to look at where we haven't maybe shored up our online accounts as much as we could. And we're going to do this through a video from the Singapore government, which Jake and I thought was actually quite fabulous, which explains how to create strong passwords and also enable two-factor authentication. So that should just pop up on your screen now. So hopefully that video's helped give you a bit of an overview of creating a strong password and turning on two-factor authentication. But the Singapore government website has some great additional resources if you did want to rewatch that video or look at some additional information on how to get started there. So we've talked about what we can do to shore up those online accounts. The third area of our risk that I want to have a look at is our potentially low levels of vigilance on our online accounts and what we can do about that. The first thing you can do, as I did, is enable some form of identity theft monitoring. This gives you a great opportunity to monitor your key ID credentials online, and then they will send you alerts if they do spot something, which will give you some guidance around how to respond. And a lot of the time the alerts I get are just that I need to change my password for a service, for example. It's also a good idea to monitor your online accounts. As I touched on earlier, a lot of us already do this maybe for our bank accounts. I know I'm checking mine daily, and credit cards. You might have transaction alerts set up, but just making sure you're being holistic with that monitoring and you're looking at all of your accounts, particularly the really high value ones, perhaps a pension fund, a superannuation and things like that. And also there are some other free things you can do. So signing up to scam alerts, there's a Singapore scam alert service, and we will provide the link to that, but that will just let you know sort of what are the scams doing the rounds in the jurisdiction you're in, what to look out for, but it also gives you the opportunity to report something to them, so you can help others if you see a scam or something suspicious in that space. And also from a vigilance perspective, we need to keep an eye out for those software updates and making sure we're applying them in a timely manner. Now, I do want to touch briefly on identity theft and just emphasize that this is very much the worst case scenario. Not every scam results in identity theft. As you saw from the example that I shared in that email scam, thankfully I didn't experience any identity theft yet, so any identity theft there. But that would very much be a worst case scenario. What we need to make sure we are aware of is what are the signs of identity theft, so you can keep an eye out. So this might include, failing to receive bills or other mail that you normally receive. Perhaps an identity thief has taken over your account and changed your billing address to cover their tracks. Receiving credit cards you didn't apply for, being denied credit for no apparent reason, and getting calls or letters from debt collectors or businesses about things that you didn't buy. It's really important to know these signs so you can report them in a timely manner to your financial institution, and typically they have a process they will follow to help you take steps to limit the impact as much as possible. But as I mentioned earlier, that is really the worst case scenario. So just to conclude, keeping yourself safe in cyberspace, it's really important we understand the risks, and we talked a little bit earlier about some of those key behaviours that might introduce risk into our online world. Appreciating that cybercrime landscape has changed, as has our digital footprint. Taking steps to strengthen your online account security and your online behaviours, having that healthy level of cynicism regarding online communications. If in doubt, verify, and remember, if something's too good to be true, it probably is. And maintaining that vigilance as well is really important. And what I do want to emphasize is this is really a circle, because this is something we need to continuously do throughout our digital lives. There's no single solution that will make us 100% safe, and risks do change. So all of the guidance we shared about spotting those phishing emails, whilst that might be current now, we know the cyber criminals may evolve, so it's important to stay on top of the latest guidance, and definitely the Singapore government has some amazing advice in that space. So with that, I am going to hand over to Jake for what is arguably the most important section of today, protecting your children online.
Thanks very much, Louisa, and what a great amount of information you've given. It's absolutely fantastic, and it relates very directly to how to protect your children. Steps like multi-factor authentication, password strength, looking out for phishing. But I think one of the things you touched on about how we can often find ourselves too trusting being on the internet, that applies doubly to children. They are just very trusting, and they don't have that healthy dose of cynicism when it comes to being online. So just as Louisa started with a poll, I too will start with a poll. So the question is, what worries you the most about your child being online? And I'll give you a few seconds to hand your vote in. But I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview. I'm going to give you basically, I've spent the last 8 years trying to protect my kids online. I've got 3 kids, 5, 12, and a 15-year-old. So I'm just going to give you some information regarding what I've done and the things that I've learned. So hopefully that can help you. Just give you a few more seconds. I think that's probably pretty good. So if we can share that response, we have online grooming is the #1 concern, with cyberbullying coming in at second. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about what you can do around that, how to stop your child from being groomed, or, you know, essentially it's more about knowing what your children are up to online and having those conversations with them about who they're talking to and what they're talking to those people that they're conversing with online about, so that you're aware of what's going on and you can put in place steps to mitigate those risks. Yes, so I'll just continue on. Now, my background is quite technical. I used to work as an IT manager, and I remember giving my eldest two a tablet each, so that, you know, they could access the internet and talk to their friends and whatnot. And I noticed that they started to spend quite a bit of time on the tablets pretty quickly, and I would often walk past their rooms and the doors would be closed and I could hear giggling, and I noticed that they would be spending quite a lot of hours on there. And it piqued my curiosity, because I wasn't sure exactly what they were doing or what they were watching or who they were talking to. And because of my background, I immediately thought, well, this is a technical problem. I can put in a technical response, and I can limit how long they have online and monitor who they're talking to and see what's going on, which websites they're visiting and whatnot. Now, I cranked up the verbosity of all the log files on the firewall just to have a look and see what they were up to. But obviously, this is something that not everyone can do. And to be honest, it was very time consuming. And that's one of the first things that I figured out. We have very limited time as parents to be able to go through and look at logs and check files and make sure that, you know, the kids are safe online. So that's a pretty limiting factor, particularly, you know, if you're working full time or if you're raising your kids, you know, you have to cook dinner and you've got to check homework and so on and so forth. So time is a very limiting factor. Now, 8 years ago, when I first started out trying to protect my kids, there wasn't the information out there that there is now. And as Louisa mentioned, there's a couple of Singaporean government websites that have a lot of great information that can help you learn about the current threats, the current mitigation strategies, because as she said, the environment is always evolving, and you really have to learn what's going on at this point in time. So it's good to check into those sites and get as much information as you can, and they'll help give you that information succinctly and quickly, which will help you with your time limitations. There's also, like, particularly if you're trying to lock down certain things like, Windows 10 or particular applications like Snapchat, Facebook, so on and so forth, it's pretty easy just to do a Google search and make sure that you go to like government type sites or trusted agencies that will give you that information, and that will go into quite detailed specifics on how to do that, which is really, really handy. The other issue that you'll face is limited resources. So, some of these solutions can be quite expensive. There's subscription fees. So these are some of the things that you have to be wary of when you're trying to protect your kids. But these days too, there are a lot of free applications that can help you put in place these technical controls that will help limit the time that your kids are online, which apps they're using, who they're talking to, making sure that they don't go to inappropriate content, and so on and so forth. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what I've learned in the last 8 years, and that is that technical controls, while they're very important, they are by no means the best source of, or the best implementation of, keeping your children secure online. So what I've learned is that you really need to do your research. You need to learn as much as you can, not just for yourself, because knowing that will help you keep yourself secure and safe online, but it will also help you to impart that knowledge to your children. So that's the best thing that you can do. Get as informed as you can by going to these websites, learning, researching, and getting to know as much as you can. Secondly, I would say start the conversation as early as you can with your children. Obviously you can't go into deep conversations with a child that's under 5, but you can make them aware of, if someone's trying to talk to them or websites not to go to, try and begin that conversation so that they're aware of the risks that are involved in being online. Because the more that they know, the better protected they're going to be. And that means that you're able to trust them. You don't have to rely on these technical controls so much, because you know that they're going to put in the behaviors that you've been teaching them so that they're more protected and safe. And again, this isn't a once-off conversation. This is an ongoing conversation. Like Louisa said, the threat landscape is always changing. People with nefarious purposes are always changing techniques and tactics and ways to approach your kids. So it's always good to stay up to date with current information and have that regular conversation with them about what's going on. Now, one of the most important things that we did as a family was we would establish rules and set clear boundaries about what they could and couldn't do. But we engaged with the kids. We didn't just tell them this is what you must do, right? So we would say to them, like, well, how much time is enough time to play games? How much time do you think would be good for the weekend to play games? And we would, talk it out with them and explain to them why we think it's appropriate for them to have, X, Y, Z time. And that helps involve them in the process, and therefore they're much more likely to obey the rules and boundaries, and also work with them to establish the consequences of if they don't follow those rules. Therefore, again, they're more likely to follow the rules that you do set. Now, back when I was starting, there wasn't so many applications that would help you to do all these technical things, although Apple have been renowned for having screen time for quite a long time. They've just recently released a product called Family Sharing. Now, this gives you really great detail on how long the kids have been spending online on your Apple devices, which apps they've been spending time on. The family sharing also has iCloud storage. So rather than the photos that they're taking being uploaded to some kind of photo sharing social application, which could be problematic. It just gets stored in your family vault, which is a really good thing to have. Microsoft, they've recently released a product called Family Safety, scheduling screen time, limiting games, making sure the content that they can see is age appropriate, and obviously all of these programs can help you locate your child's device. Microsoft and Google, I know, have an online web presence where you can just set all of the settings for all of the devices, which is really handy to do. Personally, I've been using the Google family account, so it's been really good. I think one of the things that I do find problematic with it is that monitoring calls, allowing certain people to call and allowing your children to only be able to call out to certain people, it doesn't have. But it is multi-device, so it can run across multiple different devices. Now, our youngest, he's a 5-year-old and he is a runner. So he, we've come home sometimes and he'll just jump out of the car and take off. And it has caused quite a bit of a panic sometimes. And I recently just bought him a watch. So I did all my research and the watch is fantastic. It's only limited to certain people that can call in and call out, but it's also got a location tracker. And again, as I said, over a period of time, your child's needs will change. And we didn't really want a 5-year-old to have a phone. So this seemed like a really good solution. Now, again, these are the basics of the technical controls that you should have for protecting your children online. Now, as I said, maybe one solution will work for you, one won't. But these are some of the things that you really need to be mindful of if you're looking around for a third party that can help you, other than the previous 3 that I mentioned. So setting screen time limits, filtering content so that it's age appropriate. Now, there's literally billions of websites around, and those websites change over time as well. There are companies that say that they can filter, but they will usually be based around some kind of artificial intelligence algorithm type thing, where sometimes that content will be allowed when it shouldn't be, and other times blocking it when it shouldn't be. So one of the things that I recommend is starting with a block all, and then allowing access to certain sites as and when your child needs them. So things for certain sites for homework or certain sites for education and learning and so on. It does become a little bit onerous. Some are better. Some applications are better than others at filtering that content, but it's something that you should do some research on. Activity reports, obviously you want to know how long your kids are spending online, which apps they're using, how long they're using them for. Being able to find your family, as I said, our littlest one is a runner, so it's very handy. Whether it's multi-device, so whether they can run across your Microsoft or Apple or Android infrastructure, whether they allow or block call and SMSs. Shared storage, again, taking photos and having files online that is your specific family's storage, it's fantastic. And it also means that your kids aren't sharing photos online that they probably shouldn't be. It also allows you, one thing to look for is, whether you can share services, things like Netflix and YouTube. And again, just a reminder that each of those sort of services will have specific security settings that you will probably need to set. And again, a quick Google search, go to a trusted site that will give you those specific steps on how to lock it down to make sure that your kids can only see the content that they should be seeing. Now, another thing is geofencing, which is brilliant for our family because, as I said, our little runner, we can say, okay, well, he has to stay within this area, which is our home, and he has to stay within this area, which is kinder. And if at any point in time he leaves those areas, we'll get a notification saying, hey, your child is no longer in that area, you should be alerted, and then we can go and find him if the case may be. So age appropriate advice, right? Now, again, as your child grows, they're going to need different behaviors and ideas that you need to convey to them that are okay. So under fives, often they will be using applications that help them read, learn numbers, and so on and so forth. My littlest, he loves watching drain videos and truck videos on YouTube, and it's really important that you sit with them when they're watching things like YouTube. It's very easy for them to go down that rabbit hole and then find inappropriate content. Also make sure that you limit the time that they're online, because they're little kids, they should be out playing as well. I know it's very easy from a parental perspective to just say, you're driving me bonkers, just here's a phone, here's a tablet, just go and watch something and be calm and just stay over there. But it's not the greatest thing to do. And now for an under five is a good time to begin those conversations about respectful behavior online and what to do, if they're facing any of those risks. My 12-year-old, he loves playing computer games. He would play them from as soon as he woke up to the second he went to sleep. But again, that's not appropriate. And that conversation that we would have is like, how many hours per weekend do you think you should be able to play? That sort of stuff is very important. Again, just keeping them engaged and having that interaction with them and making sure that it's open and honest, and always be as positive and supportive as you can, because that way, if they do have a problem, they'll feel comfortable in coming to you and telling them, oh, such and such has been trying to speak to me and they're trying to ask me this, that, and the other thing. And then you can discern for yourself whether that's appropriate or not. Teenagers, our teenager, she likes to lock herself in her bedroom. We try to have an open door policy, but she is pretty open and honest about, who she's talking to, because we have been having these regular conversations ongoing. And she did recently come to us saying that there was a guy trying to ask her, where she lived and so on. And I just said, no, we're going to block him because that's no good. So that reinforces, having those conversations and making sure that they feel comfortable in telling you what's going on in their lives. Again, across all of these ages, make sure they know the basics. Don't check in, don't share passwords, don't share your real name, don't share photos. Make sure all your accounts are locked down using the correct security settings. And also, create some rules for yourself and lead by example. That's another really good thing to do, because they can hold you account too. Sometimes that's not always great, but yeah. So starting the conversation, using analogies for younger kids is a really great way to do that. You can see here there's the apple, and that relates back to the Snow White and how she took a bite of an apple and looked like a beautiful apple, but it was actually full of poison. And that reiterates that not everything is what it seems. So even though something looks fantastic, it might not always be. And for younger kids, that's a really great way to start that conversation, because they can understand, and particularly if it relates to a story they're well aware of. And as they get older, discuss the risks and impacts as they become more aware and can understand more and more about what's going on. But also have a conversation with them to make sure that they aren't the ones being the bully, because you can give them all of the advice on what to do if you're not a bully, but you want to reinforce good behaviors and empathy. So make sure that they aren't doing something that they shouldn't be doing online. So just to take away, maintain that dialogue, learn as much as you can, set the boundaries, and make sure they're included in those conversations. Use technical controls. Again, that there are those top 3, Apple, Microsoft, and Google products that you can use, but depending on your family, because each family is different and the requirements are different, make sure that you have those things that I mentioned previously. Make sure your controls are age appropriate. Your children will change over time, and what they require as controls will also change. And again, when you have these conversations, always be supportive of what they're doing, and that will help them engage with you and tell you, stop them from being afraid from telling you what they're doing online. And finally, we come to resources. And Louisa, I'll let you take everyone through the resources.
Thank you, Jake, and some really great insights from your story of protecting your children online. So thank you so much for sharing those personal stories as well. So really just wanted to leave you with some resources that we think might be quite helpful. I mentioned earlier that need to remain vigilant. Hopefully you've seen that's been a theme across both of our sections of this talk today, but certainly signing up for scam alerts in your country would be highly recommended. It's definitely something I do, just so you can stay on top of the scams that are impacting. Checking your breach status. So that website I talked about where I first discovered my information had been in a data breach, haveibeenpwned.com, and you can find out whether you have been involved in some historical breaches as well. And certainly we know that cyber criminals can sometimes warehouse information, and what we mean by that is information from a breach a long time ago may surface later on, and so it's really important to know that information, change your passwords for all of those services as well, and make sure they're unique across all of them. And then the Singapore government, as well as Common Sense Media, have some amazing cybersecurity awareness content. We definitely encourage you, if you want to go and follow up some of the insights we shared today in a bit more detail, you can do so on those websites. And if you like to read books, as I know many people do, there's some great book suggestions as well on the CSA website. So with that, all that remains is, on behalf of Jake and myself, thank you so much for your attention today and for spending this whole hour with us. We really hope that you will walk away from this session today feeling a little bit more confident that you are safer online and how you can protect your children online. And we will close off the webinar now. Thank you for your time and stay safe.
Thank you so much.